September. And the trainer took us through digital evidence, admissibility of evidence, and best practices on the seizure and handling of digital evidence for those who are present during that session. Today's session is going to be on digital forensics process and is the second part in the 3-part series. There is going to be another training on the 15th of October, which is going to be moderated by Honorable Justice Joaquim Wamakau, so please don't miss it. Before I introduce the trainer, who is Mr. Lawrence Dinga, this session is going to be moderated in the following way. We are going to give the trainer 1 hour. It's going to be divided into 2 sections, 30 minutes. We take a 10-minute break where your questions, the ones that you've put across, will be answered. And then we'll have a further 30-minute training. Once the training is done, then we can have all those other questions that you will have put on the chat box. You can also send your questions to kenise@kcsfa.co.ke. I'll put it in the chat box so that all your questions on digital forensics process can be answered. So our trainer is going to be Mr. Lawrence Dinga. He holds a Master of Science in Forensic Computing and Security from the University of Derby, England, a Master of Laws from the Open University of Tanzania, a Diploma in Law from the Kenya School of Law, and is a certified information systems security professional. He's therefore very qualified to conduct this training. And our hope is that you will gain some practical knowledge that can be applied in the course of your various engagements. And noting that this training is technology-based, I wish to declare all our gadgets and networks to be working at optimum levels. And so welcome all of you. Mr. Dinga, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rehema, for that introduction. Let me just share my screen. Yeah, hello everybody, and welcome to this second part of digital forensics for legal professional. Today we are going to look at digital forensic process. Last time we looked at the digital evidence, and we need to look at what is the process of getting that digital evidence for it to be presented in court of law. It is very necessary because as a judge or as a magistrate, when you are presiding over such cases that are involve digital evidence, then you need to understand what is the process of extracting that evidence and what is the importance of following the correct processes and procedures. Now, just to recap on what we did last time, we looked at the challenges involving acquisition of digital evidence. And we say that digital evidence is, first of all, it is invisible to untrained eyes, which means that it is found in places where only specialists with special tools will be able to reach and get that evidence. So ordinary person will not be able to just get that evidence ordinarily. Now, the other thing is that digital evidence is volatile, which means that it is something that can quickly disappear or be overwritten. For example, if you look at your gadgets like the computer, you have phone, we have what we call the RAM, that is the random access memory system, which stores information that the computer is immediately using. So when you shut down that computer, immediately that information that is within the RAM will be lost. So it is important from the investigation point of view that you need to, when you go to such a place where a computer is on, you actually need to see how you can acquire that evidence that is in the RAM before you acquire any other evidence, because if you leave it, it might disappear. The other thing is that it is fragile. Now, fragile in the sense that it is, it can be altered, it can be manipulated, it can be damaged by any means. So just by a stroke of a key, the digital evidence can be damaged and or can be altered. So it is important that the process of collecting that digital evidence, it must follow some kind of methodical and systematic approach, so that it is acquired in a proper way without losing it. Now, the other thing also, it can be duplicated without degradation, which means that I can copy a file or an evidence from one device to the other, and there's no degradation which is going to be with the digital evidence itself. So it is important that when this is happening, remember, when you are copying a file, there are certain things that you are changing. For example, if it is an evidence and you are copy and paste, you are going to change the date, the time stamps within that evidence. So it is important that the person who is collecting that evidence is aware of this and makes sure that they can collect that evidence without making the alterations. Now, the other thing is that the evidence is transborder. Sometimes we call it transpartial, which means that it is possible for a criminal to be in one country, the evidence, the crime to happen in another country, and the evidence will be held yet in another country. For example, if I'm in Kenya, I attack a computer in Uganda, and that computer which is in Uganda, physically in Uganda, is storing the evidence in the cloud, which is somewhere in Netherlands. So you find that this it is transborder. It crosses. It does not give any respect to the borders. The digital evidence can be found anywhere, and the crime is happening in another location. The other thing is that you need proper procedures to collect this evidence. You need proper procedures, techniques, and tools to collect this evidence. This is because if you don't use proper procedures or you don't use proper tools, then the admissibility of that evidence is going to be questionable in the court of law. So the other thing is also the admissibility. The evidence must be obtained in compliance with the existing legislation and best practices to ensure admissibility at trial. When we talk about admissibility here, we are talking about various jurisdictions that might have different opinions about digital evidence. So you can find that in Kenya, we have a law that is taking care of digital evidence, and how that law is interpreted can be different from another jurisdiction. So admissibility of evidence will only be dictated by the local legislation and best practices within that particular jurisdiction. So those are some of the challenges that you should be prepared to when you are dealing with digital evidence. The other thing that we also looked at that we need to recap is admissibility. And why am I coming about repeating these things? Because as a judge or as a magistrate or as a prosecutor, you really need to understand some of these characteristics and the processes and procedures that are used to collect evidence so that when you are deliberating on these cases, then you'll be able to know if somebody, an expert witness comes and says the evidence, or the prosecution presents the evidence, then you can be able to know what are the procedure, and you can be able to ask relevant questions. So the other aspect that we need to recap is the admissibility of the digital evidence. Here, as I've said, that digital evidence is collected in compliance with existing national legislation and best practices. So one of the most important things about digital evidence is the legal authority to collect that evidence. The process of collecting evidence is assumed to be a legal process, and it's appropriate for the rules of evidence in that particular locality. Last time we looked at the rules of evidence. Now, if the evidence is not collected in a legal manner, then it means that it cannot be used, it cannot be admissible in the court of law. That is the doctrine of fruit of the poisonous tree. Now, the other aspect of admissibility is the authenticity of the evidence. Now, evidence is authentic when it is genuine and it matches what it claims to be. Now, the other aspect also is the relevance of that evidence. The forensic relevance is determined by whether the digital evidence establishes a credible link between the perpetrator and the target or the crime scene. Remember what you say, that digital evidence is circumstantial. It is circumstantial in the sense that, yes, I can be able to establish that, yes, this email was sent from A to B, but I cannot be able to establish that it is so and so who sat at that computer to generate that email and send it. So a relevance, forensic relevance just means that I can be able to establish that link between the perpetrator and the crime scene or the target. The other aspect is the integrity. In the integrity, there must be a proof that the digital evidence has not been altered either intentionally or unintentionally. We are going to see how do you maintain that integrity, because that integrity is very important. If evidence, the court can establish that the evidence is has got integrity and has not been changed, then it can be admitted in the court of law. The other aspect is the reliability. Now, the reliability here is saying that there must be nothing about the way in which the evidence was collected and subsequently handled that may cast doubt on its authenticity and veracity. Now, the reliability of evidence, remember, this is evidence that you are going to collect from either a computer or a mobile phone. So the process of collecting it, when you are doing that collection, you should be able to have an audit trail which clearly records what happened, how the process went, what is the success and failure of the copying process. And this audit trail should be attached to the report that the expert witness is going to testify upon in the court of law. The other aspect is the credibility. Now, credibility is a measure of a witness and whether or not a witness is worthy of belief. A witness must be considered to be credible if they have reliable information about an event. Now, in digital evidence, now, when you're presenting this is not something that is just going to be presented by just any other ordinary witness. This is an expert witness. And we expect that when they present this evidence, whether there is a law enforcement officer who is presenting that evidence, or a consultant that has been contracted to present this evidence, they must be able to testify to the court about their qualification they possess. The qualification that they possess, that tells the court that, yes, he's qualified to investigate and present this evidence. They also need to show the court the investigatory standards and procedures and the tools they employed to collect, to analyze that evidence, and the way they preserved that evidence before it was brought to court. Now, this is important because the court needs to know that they are dealing with a person who actually knows what they are doing, given that the nature of digital evidence. And I find sometimes there's a shortfall here. When you go to court, especially when I've gone to court where I'm going to rebut or to counter an evidence that has been done by prosecution, you find that there's a lot of loopholes. Now, what I've failed to observe always is that when a police officer brings evidence into court, then the court assumes that this person is qualified because he's been doing this job. And you find that sometimes these people, they are not, they don't have the proper qualification. They don't have the proper credibility when it comes to digital evidence. So it is upon the court to make sure that the person who is presenting that evidence can be interrogated to find that they are really qualified and competent to handle and analyze that evidence. Now, the last one is the validity of evidence. The validity is, here we are talking about demonstrating that digital evidence is reliable by showing that it was collected in a valid manner. Whether scientific principles were used to preserve, acquire, and analyze digital evidence, and the standards were met to handle and examine the digital evidence. Here, you don't assume everything. Here, we are looking at, we are evaluating to determine the principle, the scientific principles that were used to collect that evidence. We are looking at even the forensic laboratory. We are looking at the software, the hardware that they were using to collect that evidence. Can they be trusted so that we can believe that this evidence is actually present what it's supposed to, it claims to be. So those are some of the admissibility criteria of digital evidence, and these are universal. They apply everywhere, whether it is in Kenya, whether it is in other jurisdiction. What happens is that as the adjudicator of the law, you must be able to make sure that you understand these characteristics of evidence, so that when the expert witness or when the investigator presents the evidence, they meet this particular criteria. Now, after going that, let's look at, I was going through that to understand what you expect from evidence, digital evidence. Now, let's also look at what is the digital forensic. How do you present this, collect this evidence? What is the process? Now, the process of that collecting that evidence is what we call now the digital forensics. Now, digital forensics is a forensic science. It is a methodical application of computer investigation and analysis techniques to gather evidence found in computers or any other storage media. Now, it involves use of technologies and procedures to identify, preserve, recover, and present, analyze and present digital in a manner that is legally admissible in law. If we look at the word forensics, the word forensics is an ancient word which means actually bringing to court. So because digital forensics is a science, but the method is scientific, but you are doing that investigation with the purpose of bringing the evidence to court, then we can say that digital forensics is actually the convergence of science and law. And it is important that we understand it, the process of doing this in a way that is going to preserve the integrity of that evidence. Now, digital forensics is classified. Now, I want clear an issue here. Before we called it digital forensics, we used to call it for computer forensics. Now, digital forensics here is divided into three main classifications. We have what we call the computer forensics. The computer forensics is actually the oldest of all these classification. It is the oldest categories, and it involves the personal computers. It involves the servers. It involves storage media. Sorry. It involves storage media, and what happens is that computer forensics is a branch. The other branch is the mobile forensics, and the other branch is the network forensics. Now, let's just look at computer forensics. Now, computer forensics here is where you are getting in evidence from computers, servers, and storage media. And here there are 4 categories of computer forensics. We have what we call postmortem forensics. Now, in postmortem forensics here, we are talking about how to acquire, process, and analyze and report data which is stored on a computer that is off, that is not turned on. You go to a place and you find, for example, you go to a place and you raid that place if you are a law enforcement officer, and you find a computer. You collect that computer to go and analyze that computer in the lab. We've seen this happening several times with the EACC going raiding an office and collecting computers. And when they collect the computer, they find that the computers that they will find that they will be that will be on, and the computers that will be off when they are conducting the raid. So where the postmortem just present that class where you are doing analysis, you are acquiring and processing and reporting on computer that is off. Then we have live forensics. Live forensics is where you are dealing with computer which is on. You go to a place and you find that as an investigator, you cannot take this computer, you cannot confiscate this computer and take it to the laboratory for examination. So it forces you that you'll have to collect data from that particular computer when it is on. And there's the process that you need to follow, because remember, you need to the integrity of data. So you need not to interfere with the data within that computer. So live forensics allows you to collect digital evidence from a computer which is on, and it is there are procedures of doing that, which you are not going to cover in this particular presentation today. Then we have application forensics. Application forensics is just part of the computer forensics where you are analyzing applications like Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel. You have a database, and then you want to collect in a digital evidence from these applications. So that is, you are dealing with applications forensics. Then we have other type of forensics whereby you are collecting digital evidence from things like the DVR. You have routers, you have game consoles, you have skimming device. These are digital devices that have storage. They store data in some way. For example, nowadays you can see sunglasses. You can see things like watches with storage. So these are the media that you store data, and you can be able to collect the, digital evidence from those particular devices. So this forms part of computer forensics. Then we have mobile forensics. Now, mobile forensics is relatively new, but it has picked up very rapidly, because we find that nowadays we have very powerful mobile phones which have got tons and tons of memory to store evidence. So here, the main categories that we have in mobile forensics, we have Androids, where you collect evidence from Android phones. You have iOS forensics, you have Windows phones, and you have other phones. So the way it's things like SatNav, the way you collect evidence from, let's say, Android phones could be different from the way you collect evidence from iOS forensics, that is the Mac iPhones. So that is the branch of mobile forensics. Then we have the other branch called the network forensics. In network forensics here, we have what we call live network forensics. Live network forensics is whereby I go to a place, I go to an organization, and I say that I want a monitor, I want to collect the evidence while you are working. So what happens that you hook into that network and you capture what we call the data from that network. And when you capture that data, you analyze that data on the fly. That is what we call live network forensics. However, sometimes you might not have that time to collect and analyze on the fly. So you'll capture that data, you store that data, and then you analyze it later. There are tools that can help you to analyze that data later. So that is what we call, you capture the data and analyze data. So that is captured packets forensics. Then there is also what we call malware analysis. We've heard about ransomware. We heard about viruses. We have heard about worms that infect computer networks. In this case, what you do is that you can be able to connect to such networks and be able to analyze the malware. The malware is just malicious software, so you can be able to analyze that particular network to find if the nature of that particular malware, so that you can know how to protect your network later on. Now here we have analog versus digital forensics. In analog forensics, we normally secure the crime scene, and this is how we normally secure crime scene. You can see the police here, and they put it is no entry into this because this is a crime scene. Now the same thing you can do on digital forensics when you're doing digital forensics, in the sense that there can be a crime scene, and you do it the way that you can see in that first graphic. However, in the digital world, there's another aspect that is involved, that is the computer. Now here the computer has to be protected, has to be analyzed, because here computer can be, it was the computer that was used to do the crime. Maybe if it was not the computer used to do the crime, then it was the computer that holds some information about the crime, how it happened. Now it was used for preparation phase of the crime. Or it could be a computer that has got documentary account, let's say things like a spreadsheet where this guy is doing his accounting about his drug business. Or it may be a computer which has got some chat relations between the victim and the suspect, in others, or something to that sort. You can remember what the issue between Apple and FBI, where FBI wanted the Apple iPhone to unlock, but iPhone by default has got encryption. So you find that were they looking at that? They were looking at that because they wanted to see any evidence that is relating, that can help them solve the murder case that they were looking at. So you can find that the computer or the device that you find in the crime scene is not actually used to do the crime scene, but can give you some clue, or it can have some data which is giving you a clue about what happened. Now that is on the digital and analog. The other aspect when you're looking at this is how do you protect the evidence? Now, in a normal crime scene, what you'll always do is the old principle in forensics, whereby you have gloves to secure the evidence, in the sense that you do not want the DNA, your DNA, or fingerprints to be found on the weapon of the crime, or the weapon that was used to do the crime. So the same way, when you go to a crime scene and you find a computer that you need to analyze, that is a computer that is the suspect. You do not want to interfere with that computer. You do not want to introduce any foreign data into that computer. What you want to do is to collect that evidence and maintain its integrity. So what we use instead of using gloves as used in analog, we use what we call the right blocker. Right blocker is something that is shown on the screen. It is something that you connect to the hard disk that you are collecting. You connect to the computer, And what it does, it prevents the signals from the external computer for writing back to the evidence, the device that you are collecting the evidence from. So they can be hardware write blocker, like the one which I've shown on the screen, or they can be software write blocker. But what it is important here is that it prevents contamination of evidence from the external sources. So it is important to use write blockers when you are collecting evidence, just the way you protect yourself using the gloves. Now, the other aspect is when we're talking about collecting evidence, we have analog footprints. Now, footprints, this is where you get the kind of evidence that you are looking at. Now, in the same way, in digital forensics, we also have footprint. And these footprints, which is the digital evidence, some can be found so easily, while some can be very difficult to find, and you need specialized tools with specialized training to get those particular footprints or digital evidence from that particular device. Now, the other aspect also is what we call you can see there on the analog, we have the fingerprints. Fingerprints is when you take somebody's fingerprints, you get into the database, and you'll find that because the fingerprints are unique for every person in the whole world, you will be able to narrow down to the suspect because you have their fingerprint. The same way in the digital forensic world, when you are collecting that particular file or particular evidence, you want to make sure that it is that particular evidence that you are collecting, and it is different from any other evidence that is collected from that particular device. Now, what happens is that you use what we call hashing. Hashing is just a mathematical function that you apply to the evidence that you are collecting, and it calculates a number, a string of numbers that can be later on be used to prove that that data has not been changed. What happens is that when you know the data is known to be good, at the point the data is known to be good, you run this mathematical function on that data and produce a value. That value is called hash value through the process called hashing. Now that value is called the hash value. Sometimes you call it a message digest. Now that message digest is a string of numbers that can be able to prove that that file has not been changed, because when you send it maybe to the other person, the other person will calculate the same hash value and compare what you calculated with what the result that they have calculated. And if they match, they know that that data has not been changed. So when you are doing an imaging in computer forensics or digital forensics, when you are acquiring evidence, you have to make sure that the device that you are using or the method that you are using to acquire that evidence can be able to create that hash value or message digest between the original source of evidence with the duplicate evidence that you are collecting, so that you are able to know that yes, the evidence which is here has not been changed. Because remember, when you are going to court, you have to go with the original. You have to present the original evidence, and when you are doing analysis, you are not supposed to do analysis on the original evidence. Because why? Remember ACPO principles number 3, which states that you need another. If somebody needs to do the same thing, then they should arrive at the same results. So for you to create this hash value, there are cryptographic hash value application things, which are, one is called MD5. There's SHA-1, SHA-2, SHA-512. There are quite a number, but the most which are being used is MD5, SHA-1, and SHA-2. Okay. Any question? I think, Rehema, you have to let me know when we need to get into questions. Now, let's look at digital forensic process. Now, in digital forensic process here, we find that if you go to each and every organization, they will have their own guidelines and procedures for acquiring, acquisition and protection of digital evidence. Now, because each and every organization has got the ability to do this, it brings a problem when it comes to cross-border crimes, because you see, we say that cybercrime fears no borders. So you can find that a crime has been committed in Tanzania, and we need the culprit is in Kenya, and we need that evidence to prosecute the culprit in Kenya. So you find that is there a way that those people, when they've done their investigation and they process that evidence, can we be able to use that evidence in the court of law? So this is a problem because we've different organizations use different methods of acquiring this evidence. So the process that universally accepted is, first of all, you acquire, acquisition. This is the process: acquisition, processing, analysis, and presentation. Acquisition is where now you acquire the evidence. You get the evidence from the sources. Then you have to process that evidence. Processing evidence, now you run it through a forensic process. And this forensic process creates maybe an image, and then you analyze to find the type of evidence that you are looking for. Then you analyze that, and then you present that evidence in the court of law. Now, one thing that came, the ISO, that is International Standardization of Organization, came up with what we call ISO 27037, which describes or talks about digital forensic process. Now, the fundamental purpose of ISO 27 digital standard is to promote the good practice method and process for forensic capture and investigation. This is because each and every country, if we do not have a standard way of collecting and collecting that evidence, then that evidence cannot be used universally in any countries, because we find that each and every country has got their own guidelines, and they have got their own national legislation addressing cybercrime. So ISO 2737 is just a way where a way of making sure that we can have a standard process, we can have a universal process of addressing how the evidence is collected, how evidence is presented, and how evidence is analyzed. So that is what ISO 27037 addresses, and it addresses it has this processes: identification, then a collection, then acquisition, then preservation. Now, it does not really get into nitty-gritty of other processes, but it gives a standard way of presenting evidence, collecting this evidence, so that each and every country can use evidence that is processed within another country. Now, so what is the identification? When, as an investigator, you go somewhere and you need to collect evidence, the first thing that you do is the process of identification. And the process of identification involves the searching and recognition and documentation of potential evidence. Here is a case whereby you go to a place, you have, for example, let's say I'm working with EACC, and we are told that we are going to raid, like the raid that was done for KEMSA. Now, when you get there, you need to know what you are collecting. So first of all, you need to identify what you are collecting. Am I going to collect mobile phones. Were we going to collect the servers? Are we going to collect desktops? So you have to identify which devices that you are going to collect, because this is going to help you learn the type of digital data that you are dealing with and what kind of tools that you need to collect. There was a time I was training a certain organization, a revenue authority in Africa, and then there was a raid. They went to do a raid, and when they went there, they found that the computers were on, and these guys, what they did is that they looked at what was on the computer, and instead of collecting the CPUs, these guys collected the monitors. And because that is where they say that the evidence was residing. So you can see this kind of lack of knowledge. So you need to know if it is mobile. Why you need to know this is that the process of collecting evidence from mobile is different from the process of collecting evidence from a computer. So this step just allows you to plan the tools and techniques that you'll use later when you are collecting, when you are doing your analysis. It also allows the investigator to avoid collection of unnecessary evidence. And this is very common, especially for law enforcement. You go somewhere and you collect things that are not even necessary, things that are not going to help you analyze. And you later on, you end up not finding any evidence because you've collected the wrong devices. So that is the identification part of it. Now, after you have identified what you want, then you collect. You collect them. You collect them so that you can take them to the laboratory. Now, the process of gathering items that contain potential evidence. Here is a case whereby if it is a computer, you know this is a computer, so you are collecting that computer and you're taking it to the laboratory for further analysis. So that is the evidence collection. So this evidence must be transported back to the forensic laboratory or any other facilities for acquisition and analysis of digital evidence. I think we need I need to clarify something here, what is called acquisition and collection. Collection is you go to a place, you say that what we want mobile phones, we want to collect your mobile phones, we want to collect your servers, we want to collect your laptops, we want to collect your desktops. Now, this is collection. What you're doing, you are just collecting those evidence, the physical devices for further analysis. That is not acquisition. Acquisition is now where you will be connecting forensically to and acquiring that evidence from that particular computer or laptop. So the investigator must have the legal authority to collect that evidence, to acquire that evidence, to collect that evidence from the scene. Now, evidence that is improperly collected is not always admissible in the court of law, because you remember the doctrine of fruit of the poisonous tree. Then after collecting that evidence, we do what we call now evidence acquisition. Now, the evidence acquisition here, you remember what we say that first to the ACPO number 3, because this evidence that you are collecting, you do not need to work on the original, preserve the digital or the original evidence. You need to leave the original evidence in the state in which it was before or prior to acquisition. So that is ACPO rule number 1. And secondly, why do we have to not to work on the original evidence? Because the other party might say that they are not satisfied with the work that you've done. They are not satisfied with the report that you are giving to court, and they want that original evidence so that they can do the same process. And if they do the same process, they should be able to arrive at the same results. So this is why it is important that you work on duplicate copy. So once you collect the evidence, what you do, you take that particular evidence, if it is the hard disk, then you make an image of that evidence. That image is what you work on, and that process is called what we call disk imaging. That is creating bit by bit copy of the content of the device. Now, I want to clarify something. Disk imaging or the bit by bit copy is totally different from what we call copy and paste. You can't take that particular hard disk, slot it in a computer, and then say copy all the files to the from the source to the destination. That will not work with, because that's not forensic. What happens that remember when we were looking at the data in a hard disk, we say that there's the volatile data, and there's a data specific data that we talked about, deleted files. And we say that when file is deleted in a computer, it is not deleted as such. What happens that the operating system of the computer will mark that space there where the file was residing as complete, so as deleted, so that when a new file comes, it will be copied into that space. Now, it depends on the file which was originally in that space and the file that you are going to copy. Now, if you find that the file that was originally in that place was, let's say, 10 MB, and you are bringing a new file which is 5 MB, then it is going to be copied in on that space of 10 MB. But there are some space which is going to remain of that original file, which is not copied. That is what we call the slack spaces. So when you are doing this imaging, you are copying each and everything physically from that hard disk. The image that you are going to create is a true representation of that hard disk. And that is what you are going to analyze. And this is what we say. I say that you use what we call write blocker to prevent the alteration of data during the copying process, because you need to maintain the integrity of that data. So evidence acquisition is a way of making sure that you do a bit by bit copy of the content of the original hard disk, and you create an image of that hard disk. That image of hard disk you have to create. Remember what we talked about, the fingerprint, the hash value. You create a hash value of that image and compare it with the original hard disk. Then you know that nothing has changed. So sometimes we call it bit by bit copy, or we call it a bit stream copy of the original. Now, this is what I mean. If you can see that, you can see I've connected the hardware write blocker back when whatever it is connecting to a computer, and the image that I want to acquire, the evidence that I want to acquire is on the hard disk on the right hand side. And you can see I've connected the hard disk through a cable to this hardware device, and now I connect it to computer. So when I'm grabbing evidence from this particular hard disk, I'm making sure that there's no information that is written back to the hard disk that can contaminate the evidence there. So what happens is that the original content of this hard disk is going to be created as an image, which is a file, an image on the computer, and then I can now analyze. That image is a true representation of the content, full content of that hard disk. And that is what I'm going to analyze to find evidence that I'm looking for in that particular hard disk. Now, precautions should be taken to prevent the exposure to evidence that may be contaminated with dangerous substances or hazardous material. All items submitted for forensic examination should be inspected for their physical integrity, making sure that there's the integrity of the evidence. And methods for acquiring evidence should be forensically sound and verifiable. Method deviation should be documented, which means that remember the validity of the evidence. When I talked about the validity, in that the process, the procedures, and the standards which you are using to do this is forensically viable, verifiable, so that when you go to court, we can be able to be sure that yes, we can rely on this evidence because it was scientifically collected. If we cannot establish that it was scientifically collected, then that evidence is not going to be admissible in court of law. Remember, forensic is science. It is science, and whatever we're collecting is we are collecting it with the intention of bringing it back to the court of law. Now,
Mr.
yes,
Dinga,
yes.
maybe we can take a break for any questions that the participants might have. Anyone who has a question, could you please either put it in the chat or unmute yourself so that you can be able to ask the question. Any questions so far? All right. So that means that either I will say that people are really either very interested in this information, they are digesting all of it, such that there are no questions that have arisen at this moment. So,
or maybe it is too technical.
I think it's been quite an interesting training. I'm actually taking notes. This is something that I wasn't even aware of, so it's really interesting.
So should I go on?
Yeah, because if there are no questions, I think you can proceed. Thank you.
All right. So as I was just explaining, the evidence acquisition is different from evidence collection. Evidence collection is where you collect the physical sources of evidence, the physical devices that contain the evidence that you are looking for. Once you collect that evidence, then you submit it to what we call the evidence acquisition. Now, evidence acquisition, we've said, it is a process of making sure that you do not work on analyze the original evidence. Instead, you are acquiring an image of that original evidence through a process of evidence acquisition. And you are using what we call the right blockers to make sure that you do not contaminate the original evidence, because the original evidence might be used, is needed in the court of law. Now, I have a very a good example last year when I went to court, and the prosecution had presented the evidence, and they had presented the device that they used to collect the evidence. Then later on, they came, the investigators came and collected that device, claiming that they had some other pieces of evidence which was inside, and they wanted to analyze. So the court actually allowed them to collect this evidence, which in essence broke the chain of custody. Because first of all, now you cannot, they cannot bring the device back to court because we don't know what happened, what they have done with it. Secondly, if there was some evidence in that particular device, how sure that the evidence was not contaminated? So that's why it is important that this issue of evidence acquisition is done in a proper way to make sure that the evidence has got the integrity. And we say that, how do you calculate the integrity? You will calculate the integrity by using the cryptographic hashes, what is called the MD5, the SHA-1, the SHA-2, and others. What this do is that hashing is a mathematical function which takes the data which is known to be good at that particular time, then runs that data through a mathematical function and comes up with a number, a series of numbers, which shows that the data has not been changed. Because when you want to use that data at some particular point, then you calculate the hash value again, and to compare the hash value that was created earlier with what you created, and to compare. If they are the same, then you know the data has not been changed in any way. The same thing when you're acquiring the evidence, when you create an image of the hard disk. Remember what we talked when the graphic I showed you earlier in the earlier slide, when you're creating the image of that particular hard disk, you need to create, calculate the hash value, and then compare the hash value with the image of the hard disk and the particular image that you created. Now, the hash value steps will be taken to ensure integrity of the data acquired. This may include one of the following: the hash values. We've talked about the hash value stored in read-only media and sealed in a tamper-proof bag, something like that. Now, how do there are various types of acquisition. Now, acquisition, we are talking about physical acquisition. Physical acquisition is whereby I'm taking the hard disk that has got the evidence. Remember, I went and collected the computer, and that computer, where is the data stored in that computer, is on a hard disk. So I've collected that computer. I brought it. I'm now taking the hard disk, connecting it to where I want to image the data, and then doing the forensic imaging. Now, that is what we call the physical imaging or physical acquisition. This is where hardware or software write blocker is used to, when possible, to prevent the writing back to the original evidence. Then we have what we call the logical. Logical acquisition is whereby you do not have time to create the full image of the hard disk or of that particular device. So what you have, you choose what files you copy from that particular original device. So you only copy certain files that are of interest. For example, if you go to a place and you find that the warrant that you've been given cannot allow you to do imaging of the full hard disk, then what you do what we call the logical acquisition. Somebody is writing on my screen. Now, then there is what we call the live acquisition. Live acquisition, I've said, it is where you go and you find the computer is on and you cannot check that computer. There's no way you can go to, let's say, Kenya Power and Lighting, and you say that I want to collect a server which is controlling the distribution of power around the country. It is impossible. It is not possible. So if there's something that you need to collect from that particular server or particular computer, you need to collect it while the computer is running. That is what we call live acquisition. And you need to follow the due process to make sure that whatever you are collecting has got integrity, in the sense that the data is not contaminated when it is brought, the evidence is not contaminated when it is brought to court. That is very, very important. Now, once you've collected the thing, when you're collecting, you need to document. It is important in digital forensic investigation, documentation. You need to document each and everything that you are doing to make sure that whatever you present in the court of law, somebody can be able to follow. And somebody can be able to follow the process the way you documented it and arrive at the same results. So documentation is very important in digital forensics, and that's why sometimes when I go to collect some evidence, first of all, when I reach the where the evidence is collected, what I do first is I take a picture. I take a picture of that computer that I'm going to collect. I make sure that I take pictures from all angles so that when something happens, I go to court, I can be able to show the court that this is the picture I took, and this is how the evidence was looking at that particular time. So that picture is part of the documentation. So you must make sure that you have the examiner's name is put, the acquisition date is put, you have the acquisition details, like the type of acquisition, whether it is imaging, the kind of the computer. There's a lot of information that you collect, and this is you collect in what you create what we call an acquisition image acquisition worksheet, which has got all the information that you need to collect, so that, and this come part and parcel of your report, is a documentation that is coming part and parcel of your report, because you are going to use it in the court of law. Now, after that, we remember you preserve it. The evidence must be preserved in a way that its condition is maintained, because it is evidence is fragile and can be destroyed by by a stroke of a key. So evidence preservation helps assure its admissibility in court, because it was properly preserved. So preservation part makes sure that evidence is stored under strict access controls to protect it from any accidental or deliberate modification, so as or any other environmental condition that might affect the evidence. So this is what we call now evidence management, because evidence management here, we are talking about the procedures, we are talking about the evidence transfer, we are talking about documentation, and talking about the protection of that evidence. Now, evidence management must help in the protection of true temperament of the evidence. So this is achieved by proper handling and documentation of evidence. And at the time of evidence transfer, both the sender and the receiver must give information about the date and time of the transfer in the chain of custody record. Now, the procedures here involve used to protect the evidence when collecting and shipping the evidence. You have to look at the logbook of the project, tag to uniquely identify the evidence and a chain of custody. So this is all involved in what we call the evidence management, which I think Kenny had shown us a course there, which is talking about evidence management. Now, when we talk about evidence management, we talk about what we call the chain of custody. Chain of custody is very important in forensics. Now, as judges and magistrates, I think before you deliberate on any case, you need to make sure that any evidence has got a chain of custody, because this is a legal document that shows the paper trail, showing the seizure, the custody, control, transfer, analysis, and disposition of physical or electronic evidence. When the evidence was collected, where was it collected? Who collected it? Such details must be in the chain of custody record, so that we know that this evidence, which is presented in the court, is the same evidence that was collected. Remember ACPO principles. To maintain the chain of custody, you must preserve the evidence from the time it is collected to the time it is presented to the court. Now, to prove the chain of custody, the forensic investigator need to testify that the evidence offered in court is the same evidence that was collected. They also have to testify to the time and the date the evidence was collected or transferred to another agency, and there must be no tampering of evidence while it was in the custody. So a chain of custody should be initiated at the time evidence is recovered, and the chain of custody begins as soon as the seizure takes place and concludes when the evidence is actually destroyed or returned to the owner. So chain of custody, if somebody brings, if the expert witness brings the evidence in court and there's no proper chain of custody, I don't think you as a magistrate or a judge should be able to accept that evidence, because you are doubting, you should be doubting how that evidence has been maintained since it was collected and brought to court. Now, what are the chain of custody? We say that chain of custody is a legal document that demonstrates the progression of evidence as it travels from the original evidence location to the forensic laboratory. Now, its functions is to governs the collection, handling, storage, testing, and disposition of evidence. It also safeguards against tampering with or substitution of evidence, and it documents that these steps have been carried out. And the chain of custody form should identify the sample collector who collected the evidence, the sample description, the type and the number, the sample data and location, any other thing that needs to be put there. That must be very clear. So as a judge or a magistrate, I think it is important to be able to make sure that this is completely clear when the evidence is brought to court. I've just shown us a sample of chain of custody. You can customize, there's so many things that you can put in the chain of custody. Now, after that, you do the examination of the evidence. That is sometimes we call it analysis or examination. But we can say examination, we can use the terms vice versa, because examination is now you analyze or you examine the evidence, the evidence that you collected to find if there's something that you are looking for. So this phase requires the use of appropriate forensic tools and methods to uncover the digital data. Now, here is a case where you've had forensic tools like Celebrite for phones. You've had something like Oxygen for mobile phones. You've had something like FTK from Access Data. You've had something like Ditigo. There are so many. There are so many, like so many tools that are being used for analysis of this evidence. But what is important is what you are getting is that you should be able to get the right evidence that you are looking for. So the type of forensic tools vary depending on the type of digital forensics which you are conducting. For example, I've just said when you are doing you are conducting the analysis of mobile phones, it is different from conducting analysis of computers. So conducting an examination on the original evidence should be avoided as much as possible because you remember you work on image evidence. Now, after that, you do your reporting. The report should be clear, concise, and written for the appropriate evidence. So you need to document the scope and the purpose of the examination. If you are hired to do that, what are you supposed to do? You have to give the detailed description of the media, examine if it is a hard disk, optical flash disk, you need to do that. You need to document each and every phase that you went through, identifying its relevancy to the investigation. You need to provide description of the evidence that was acquired during the investigation, and you need to provide examiner's name and the date of examination. That is the report that you need to, because this report is what you are going to, if you are hired. For me, when I'm hired, I do the report and I present it to the person who hired me to do that. And then I also need, they also need to share this report with the other party if it is a case that involves that. Now, what is the aspects of good report? A good report achieves the purpose by answering the questions that were set out in the mandate for the investigators. So it is designed to meet the needs of the decision maker. Now, it is also making sure that the decision maker must rely on the facts that were presented in the report, and the facts that must be based on the evidence in the file. And it also makes sure that you also need to make sure that it is clear and written in a neutral language, so that decision maker and other readers will be able to understand it. There's a mistake that we technical people do. You do a report and you try to include jargons in that report. So that, and you remember, this report is going to be read by the prosecutor, is going to be read by the judge, by the magistrate, by the lawyers. These are not technical people. These people do not want to learn those technical terms or technical jargons. What they want to know is that this report should be able to help them make a decision. If it is a prosecution decision, they can be able to rely on that report and make their judgment from that report, because it gives them information in a way that they are able to understand. The report should also be structured in such a way so that information can be located easily. Now, the first, what you need to know is that when you are talking about forensics examination, you need to make sure that you follow the standards and best practices that will be able to establish the reliability and validity of the forensic results. Because for it to be admissible, the tools that you are using for doing the process for doing the investigation, they must be proven to be scientifically valid, so that the results that are produced from them can be able to be relied upon. The results should be two aspects of the results. The results should be repeatable and reproducible if you're using this for forensic tools. So if the results which are repeatable is when you have the same digital forensic results that are obtained using the same test items, equipment, laboratory, and operator results. Now, the results can be reproducible when the same digital forensic results are obtained using the same items, but different equipment, laboratory, and operators, which means that if this aspect of to be reproducible means that when the other party says that no, we do not rely on this particular results, then they can take the original evidence. They'll use different test tools, they'll use different equipment, but they will be able to arrive at the same results eventually. So now, I think that ends my presentation today. Then I'll take it back to you, Rehema, for any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dinga. That has been very eye-opening and quite interesting. And I think you've broken down the training in a very simple way, I would say, in a way that I've actually managed to understand. So there are a few questions that the participants have been asking. Let me just read them from the chat. One of them was asking, is objectivity one of the key values in admissibility of a digital evidence? And the second question was, are our current judges trained in handling digital forensics issues? So you can answer those two as we collect more questions for you.
I think I just enumerated some of the characteristics or some of the things that you need to look at when you are for the admission of digital evidence in the court of law. And yes, objectivity is one of them. And for it to be admissible, apart from the others that I also enumerated, things like the credibility, the reliability, and so forth. So yeah, those are some of the things that you need to look at as a judge or a magistrate before you admit the digital evidence in the court of law. Second, the thing is, when it comes to training, I think this is a new frontier. You'll all agree with me that it is not something that has been there ever since. It is a new frontier, and everybody, I think most of us are new to this, including judges and magistrates. Even though there's been so many efforts, including this KCSFA, to train judges and magistrates and prosecutors on digital evidence, but it is slow. But I think we are moving, and we are moving somewhere. and I think the results will be good in the near future. It is not like this, the training that we are doing right now, the digital forensics for legal professionals. I broke it down into three aspects: the digital evidence, the forensic process, and then the expert witness in court. Now, this is a training that will take 3 days face-to-face, because where we even give you practical example when we talk about imaging, because right now I'm just talking about imaging, and sometimes you are imagining how imaging is done in your head. But if it is a face-to-face training, you'll be able to actually learn practically how these things happen. Then you can be able to appreciate more their value. So I think we'll be doing this occasionally. We'll be doing this with the KCSFA, and I think we'll move somewhere eventually.
Okay. So there's another question. If the user was running an OS from external disk, will forensics show?
Okay, I talked about the process. Now, the external disk that you are running has got what we call the operating system. And for a computer to work, the operating system must boot. Now, the operating system is running from that boot sector of that particular hard disk. So it depends on where exactly is your data located that you want actually investigate. Is it running on that external disk that you want to investigate, or that external disk was just booting the computer, and the computer has got some other storage? It depends where the data is stored. But in short, you will be able to acquire data either from external disk or from internal disk. Remember, what I said is, when the computer, you find that the computer is on, if you put it on, there's a process that the computer does. And in that process, it writes back the data into the hard disk, whether it is external or whether it is internal. It writes back the data into hard disk. So when you put that computer on, which means that the possibility of interfering or contaminating the evidence is very high. So in such cases, there's a process. The process could be, if I want to make sure that that particular hard disk is not contaminated, I don't want to put the computer. I boot the computer with, let's say, a DVD or a CD with a boot sector, with an operating system in it. So when it boots, then it makes sure that that particular external hard disk or internal hard disk is not interfered with, and the data is not contaminated. So it is possible to get data, whether it is external or internal hard disk. Yes. Any other question? I hope I'm clear on that.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. There's another question. Is there a chance that the hash value will be different for the same data that has been collected from a device whose integrity has been compromised? That's the first question. And then another one, there are some terms that you are using. There's SHA-1, 2, and MD5. Could you just tell us what they stand in for?
Okay. The possibility of data, let me start like this way. The hashing, the function of hashing is to maintain the integrity of data. And I gave you an example is where you have information that is known to be good at that particular time. So you must make sure that if this information is changed, you'll be able to know. So that is where the integrity and the hash value comes in. Now, what happens is that at that particular time when the information is known to be good, you create a hash value, or you run that information through a mathematical function, which is called hashing, and it creates a hash value. A hash value is just a string of numbers. So you take a variable strings, running it through a mathematical function, and you create a fixed value string of numbers, which is called the hashing. And the process of doing that, you use the hashing algorithms, which are, I would say, the MD5. MD5 stands for the message digest version 5. SHA-1, SHA-2. SHA-1 stands for secure hashing version 1, and SHA-2 is secure hashing version 2. These are some of the prominent mathematical or cryptographic hashing techniques that are currently being used. Thank you. Any other question?
Just a comment by Honorable Lillian Arika that she's hoping that in the next session or any training that will be covered, we can cover common mistakes that are made by investigating officers, whereby you go to court and preliminary objections are raised during the trial. So we're hoping that that is something that we can be able to arrange for upcoming trainings. We've got another question here. Please explain what we mean by cloud forensics. Cloud forensics. So that is one. Oh, yeah. Then, yeah, you can explain that first. Thank you.
Okay.
Cloud forensics.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Now, let me start like this. We talked about the classes of digital forensics, and we say that computer forensics was the first one. Why was it the first one? Because when computers started, and then the issue of investigation started, then people assumed that any data was coming from the computers, and the computer was the main devices to collect data from. Then as the technology progressed, we've started getting mobile phones. We started getting digital cameras. We started getting CCTV. So you find that the forensic is not only limited to computers, it's surpassing computers and getting into the other digital evidence, digital devices, so you can get evidence from those devices. Now, this is why the name changed from computer forensics to more of digital forensics. But now you find that I give you an example where I go for a raid and I pick computers, because those computers or laptops have got hard disks which are used to store information. The information that is permanent, the information that is saved there. So the forensic investigation is limited to that particular hard disk. However, things have changed, and with the cloud computing, things have actually complicated the issue of forensics, because now we are not having doing investigation on that particular laptop or computer locally. However, the data is stored somewhere in the internet. The cloud is just the internet, but more so, whether it is stored on the internet, it is stored on a particular computer on the internet, because the internet is just a connection of computers. So that information is residing on another hard disk on a computer somewhere around the world, which we don't know. That's why we call it cloud. So cloud forensic is the process of investigating that information, that evidence, which is found somewhere in which you don't know, but you want to collect that evidence. Now, this involves third parties. It involves third party in the sense that you need to know the service provider of the internet. where that information is stored. They will have to tell you. Then the complication part of it is where is the jurisdiction. Where how do you collect that evidence from that particular jurisdiction without proper legal procedures? And this is why the mutual legal assistance comes in, because we find that because cybercrime transcends borders, then there could be a mutual legal assistance between two countries, in the sense that when something happens and we need to investigate, then our investigators can collect the data from that particular jurisdiction, because the server will be known, the computer will be known. So it's just a process of getting that data locally for investigation. That is the process of cloud computing. You are investigating evidence which is found somewhere on the internet, but you need to use legal means, because not all countries have got legal this mutual legal agreements to collect that. So it becomes a challenge, and that's why even in Kenya, I think we are advised that we sign to what we call the Budapest Convention, which is from the Council of Europe, so that this mutual legal assistance can be established between Kenya and other countries who are members. Otherwise, without that, it becomes complicated, or because of the jurisdiction. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that. Now, when you were talking about cloud forensics, there's this question that came up. Could the magnitude of evidence that was being looked for during the last presidential petition have been obtained in the limited time that was given, considering that there are so many stages to be covered? Is it possible to give us an answer for that?
I don't want to be political for somebody to see me that I'm taking side, but what I'm telling you, what I can say is that yes, it was possible if there was political will to do that.
Okay, so there's another question here. Among the three classes of forensics, where does data retrieved from old fixed landline phone fall? You know, like the old landlines that we used to use. If there's data that is there, where does it fall?
Old landline phones. They yes. Have the data was was residing somewhere in exchange houses, and these exchange houses are controlled by computers. So I believe that the data should be found in those exchange houses, those computers that are controlling the exchange houses. That is where you find the data.
Okay. Then the next question is, how should one deal with anti-forensic techniques?
That is a big problem. And anti-forensics is against forensics. And even as I'm talking to you now, I have that problem, because I was imaging a hard disk, and when I looked at the hard disk, I found that it was encrypted with BitLocker. So I'm stuck. So those are things which are still very, very complicated when it comes to forensics. When something is encrypted, it becomes difficult to derive the evidence unless you have the key of that particular hard disk. That's why remember advice that when you find that the computer is on, do not shut it down. Why? Because it could be that the hard disk is encrypted. The moment you shut that computer down, then you'll not be able to get the keys to decrypt the hard disk. And when it is on, you can do what we call memory acquisition, because when the computer is on, and if it was encrypted, then the keys can be somewhere in the RAM. We talked about the random access memory. The keys can be there in in the RAM, then you can do a memory acquisition and you'll be able to get the evidence from that. Now, this is anti-forensics is a problem in forensic investigation. Remember, there was a story of this guy called Ross Ulbricht, or Dread Pirate Roberts. When you go through that, if you've not gone through that, you can Google and find out Silk Road. Silk Road was a website in the dark web which was selling drugs, and it was where you could buy hitman, or you could be able to sell, do illicit trade. It was like an eBay, and they were trading through Bitcoins. But because it is anonymous, it was very difficult. So it took FBI a lot of time for them to investigate this. The only why this Ulbricht was caught is because there's a time he used his real email address on the conventional web, and that's why FBI caught him. Now, what happens is that his laptop had got encryption, and when FBI were going, the 3 FBI agents were going for him, they made sure that when they capture him, the laptop should not be shut, because by the time he flaps off the laptop, the encryption takes place. And once the encryption takes effect, there's nothing you can do about that hard disk. So they had to hoodwink him. Somebody had to go and an FBI lady had to go sit with him, take sometimes, and then the other guys came and grabbed the laptop. And in that laptop, they were lucky to find that he had around 28 million worth of dollars worth of Bitcoins. So what I'm trying to say is that encryption is a problem in forensics, and right as that we are talking now, I don't know any solution that we can use to defeat encryption.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for that explanation. Now, the last question is, does the use of proxy servers hinder the collection of evidence?
Yes, yes or no. You must, yes, in the sense that using proxy is there's anonymity, and yeah, no, in the sense that if you know what you are doing, then you'll be able to do the collection, and that is how FBI does its work. You know what I don't know whether you've heard what we call Tor. Tor just means the onion router. Tor is a proxy browser. When you are using Tor, you are anonymous on the internet, and nobody will be able to trace where you are browsing from, because what it does is it connects randomly to one server, and envelopes, takes out the outer envelopes. The server, that server it goes to creates another layer, and that way until it reaches the destination. So nobody can be able to trace you. That is, from a layman point of view, it will be difficult. But for somebody who is experienced, like people like FBI, will still be able to do that investigation and will still be able to catch up with you. People normally say that, yes, Bitcoins is anonymous, but I'm telling you, it's anonymous, but we can catch you if the people who are doing the investigation know what they are doing. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I think this brings us to the close of this training session. Thank you very much for everyone that attended. It's been very interesting and very informative. I will now invite Kenise Agira to just give us closing remarks. And just before I give him a chance to talk, I wish to inform all of you that October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So follow KCSFA, we'll be creating awareness here and there just to ensure that we are all secured wherever we are. So, Kenise. Kenise? Oh, all right.
Yes, Rehema.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you. Lawrence, that has been a good presentation. And I think it was really packed an idea. So
Kenneth, your connection is so bad.
I think maybe I can assist in case maybe his connection is very, very bad.
Please do.
I think, yeah, Mr. Kenise was.
Likewise to you.
Going to give the closing remark, actually participated in this webinar on the 15th of October, because this is the last part of the series. So we encourage all of you to continue joining in this, and especially because October, as we've heard from Rehema, is going to be the awareness month, so that at least for the judges, for the judicial officers, the lawyers, maybe any who are here, the prosecutors and the police officers, can then be able to be on the same page. I remember, like I was saying to Honorable Larika, who is present here, that when we did the election dispute resolution trainings, by the time the lawyers came, we were all very aware of what is happening. That is why it's important that the bench also becomes very prepared in this. So I think because we know that Kenyans love watching news, and we do not want people to kill us so that the next time when we ask you to join us, you refuse. I think, Kenise, maybe you can nod and say whether I have said everything you wanted to say. Maybe you can nod from where you are so that I can see whether I have done it. Is that okay? All right. I think he's smiling, and I don't know whether to take it back again to Rehema. Thank you very much. If he's still not being able to be heard.
Thank you very much, honorable participants. It's been a pleasure hosting you for this training session, and I'm sure that you've learned a thing or two about the digital forensics processes. And please welcome back on the 15th of October so that we can have a further session on with Mr. Dinga. And so this is just to tell everyone you can live at your own pace, and welcome back again on the 15th.
All right, thank you, and bye everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rehema. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.